You stopped caring. The people who once drained you emotionally now get nothing from you. You have become cold, distant, unreachable. And the strangest part, you feel no guilt about it. But this is not avoidant attachment in the way modern psychology defines it. Jung called this something far more dangerous. A necessary withdrawal into the self that marks the beginning of a complete psychological transformation. What happens when the empath finally stops absorbing everyone else's pain and starts protecting their own consciousness? Today, we explore Jung's most controversial insight about empaths who shut the door and never look back. The case that changed everything began in Jung's Zurich clinic in 1917. A patient arrived, presenting what appeared to be classic withdrawal symptoms. She refused to engage with her family, avoided social gatherings, and had systematically cut contact with nearly everyone from her past life. Other therapists had diagnosed her with depression, social anxiety, even schizoid personality disorder. But Jung saw something completely different. He was looking at an empath who had finally learned to conserve her psychic energy. This patient had spent 32 years being what Jung called an emotional shock absorber for everyone around her. Alcoholic father, narcissistic mother, abusive relationships, toxic friendships. She had absorbed it all, explained it all away, forgiven it all repeatedly. Then something shifted. Jung documented it in his private notes as the clarity event. The moment when accumulated betrayal finally overwhelmed the empath's need to believe the best in people. What happened next terrified everyone who knew her. The patient did not break down. She did not cry or scream or beg for explanations. Instead, she became unnaturally calm. Jung described it as watching someone finally remove a mask they had worn for 3 decades. The performance of caring was over. She stopped explaining herself, stopped defending her perceptions, stopped trying to make unconscious people understand conscious observations. Her family called it cruel. Jung called it boundary enforcement. What made this case so remarkable was the precision of her transformation. Jung documented that she did not become randomly cold to everyone. She became strategically unavailable to people who had proven they would exploit her availability. Her husband, who had cheated while she forgave and absorbed his shame. Her mother, who had dumped unprocessed rage onto her daughter for 30 years. Her siblings, who called only when they needed emotional labor. The patient cut them all off within 2 weeks. No dramatic confrontations, no lengthy explanations. When they accused her of being heartless, she did not defend herself. Here is what Jung discovered about empaths that modern psychology still struggles to accept. Empaths do not feel more than other people. They perceive more. Their brains process emotional information at a level that most humans never access. They see the lies beneath polite conversations, the desperation behind confident presentations, the manipulation disguised as concern. Jung wrote in his Red Book period notes that there are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. This is not a gift, it is a burden that destroys most people who carry it. The empath sees everything, and seeing everything means carrying everyone else's rejected shadow material. The anger your mother will not acknowledge. The insecurity your partner hides behind arrogance. The cruelty your friend disguises as honesty. Empaths become repositories for all the darkness that others refuse to integrate. This creates what Jung called participation mystique, a state where the empath's psychological boundaries dissolve completely. They can no longer distinguish between their own emotions and the unconscious contents they are absorbing from everyone around them. They feel depressed, but the depression belongs to their spouse. They feel anxious, but the anxiety is their parents' unprocessed trauma. They feel worthless, but the shame is actually being projected onto them by people who cannot face their own inadequacy. Most empaths spend decades trapped in this state, absorbing, processing, healing everyone except themselves. Jung identified what finally breaks this pattern. It is not one massive betrayal. It is accumulation. Micro-betrayal after micro-betrayal, all dismissed by the empath, who keeps believing people will eventually recognize their sacrifice and reciprocate their care. The empath remembers everything. Every time they were called too sensitive when they named the truth. Every instance their boundaries were violated. Every moment they predicted exactly what would happen and were told they were being negative. Jung called this the emotional ledger. Empaths keep perfect records in their unconscious mind. This ledger accumulates silently for years, sometimes decades. Then comes the final entry, the betrayal that tips the scale. It is often not the worst thing that has happened to them. It is simply the thing that makes the pattern undeniable. The clarity event happens when the empath's pattern recognition finally overwhelms their hope. They see with absolute certainty that the person they have been protecting will never change, that the family system they have been stabilizing is fundamentally toxic. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. That their empathy has been weaponized against them by people who view compassion as weakness to exploit. In that moment, something inside the empath dies. Not their capacity to feel, their willingness to feel for people who do not deserve it. Jung documented what happens next with clinical precision. The empath stops absorbing. They stop explaining. They stop defending their reality against other people's projections. They become what everyone else calls avoidant. But this is not avoidant attachment. This is strategic withdrawal. This is conservation of psychic energy. This is what Jung called the integration of the shadow. Here is the part that terrifies people who have been feeding off empaths. The transformation is permanent. The empath who has integrated their shadow does not cycle back into people-pleasing. They do not apologize for boundaries. They do not second-guess their perceptions anymore. They have become psychologically complete by finally accepting the part of themselves they were taught to deny. The capacity to be cold. Society conditions empaths to believe that coldness is cruelty, that withdrawal is abandonment, that saying no is selfishness. This conditioning serves a very specific purpose. It keeps empaths available for exploitation. Jung understood that the capacity for coldness is not the opposite of empathy. It is empathy's necessary shadow. You cannot truly care for people without also possessing the ability to stop caring for those who abuse your care. The empath who has never integrated their cold shadow is not virtuous. They are unconscious. The integrated empath develops what Jung called conscious cruelty. Not cruelty for its own sake, but the ability to be ruthlessly precise with people who mistake kindness for weakness. They can read you completely, see your insecurities and wounds and fears with perfect clarity, and choose not to accommodate them anymore. This is what makes the awakened empath so dangerous to manipulators. They possess all the perceptive abilities they always had, but they are no longer obligated to use those abilities in service of people who do not reciprocate. Jung documented a fascinating example. His patient encountered her ex-husband 2 years after their divorce. He attempted his old manipulation tactics. In the past, she would have absorbed all of it. Instead, she looked at him with surgical detachment and said, "Your tactics worked when I was unconscious." Then she walked away. Jung noted in his records that she had simply stopped pretending she did not see his manipulation. This is the integrated empath's superpower. They can feel everything and choose everything. They can be warm as summer with people who earn it, and cold as winter with people who do not. They can switch between these states consciously, strategically, without guilt. Jung's patient demonstrated this transformation perfectly. When her family confronted her about her coldness, she did not defend herself. She simply stated facts. "You have used my empathy as a dumping ground for 32 years. I'm no longer available for that function. The conversation is over." Her family accused her of being heartless. Jung noted in his records that she had simply learned to direct her heart toward people who valued it. This is where Jung's analysis becomes controversial. He observed that when empaths stop absorbing everyone else's shadow material, entire social systems begin to collapse. The alcoholic who relied on the empath to manage their chaos must finally face their addiction. The narcissist who used the empath as an emotional punching bag loses their favorite target. The dysfunctional family that organized itself around the empath's caretaking role disintegrates. Jung documented this pattern across multiple cases. When empaths withdraw from their caretaking roles, entire systems collapse. Both parents blamed her for abandoning the family in one case. In another, a friend group disintegrated when their emotional glue disappeared. The empath's withdrawal does not cause these collapses. It reveals them. These systems were always broken. The empath was just providing the glue that held them together. Jung called this the scapegoat's revenge, though he noted it was not revenge at all. The empath does not punish. They simply stop preventing natural consequences. When you remove the person who has been absorbing all the dysfunction, that dysfunction must go somewhere. Usually it lands back on the people who created it. But here is what Jung found most fascinating about the empath's transformation. The avoidance is not the end state. It is a necessary phase in what he called the individuation process. Individuation is Jung's term for becoming psychologically whole. For the empath, this means learning to feel everything without being destroyed by it, to see clearly without becoming cynical, to care deeply without losing themselves. The avoidant phase is where the empath builds the psychological structure necessary to maintain their identity while engaging with others' unconscious contents. They learn to create what Jung called containers, mental spaces where they can hold someone else's pain temporarily without absorbing it permanently. This is completely different from the empath's previous state. Before, they had no boundaries. Everything flowed into them. After integration, they have conscious, permeable boundaries. They choose what to let in and what to keep out. Jung documented 3 distinct stages in the empath's transformation from unconscious absorption to conscious engagement. Stage 1 is recognition. The empath must first acknowledge that they have been absorbing psychological material that does not belong to them. This requires radical self-honesty. The depression you have carried for 5 years might not be yours. The anxiety that wakes you at 3 a.m. might be your mother's unprocessed fear. The shame that makes you feel worthless might be projected onto you by a partner who cannot face their own inadequacy. Recognition is painful because it means admitting that much of what you have experienced as your own inner world is actually contamination from others' unconscious minds. Time 0.6. Stage 2 is withdrawal. This is the avoidant phase. The empath must completely remove themselves from the systems that have been using them as emotional dumping grounds. No contact with toxic family members. No explanations to manipulative partners. No attempts to make unconscious people understand conscious observations. This stage feels cruel to everyone except the empath. Because for the first time in their life, the empath is prioritizing their own psychological survival over everyone else's comfort. What happens during withdrawal is crucial. The empath is not just avoiding people, they are decontaminating their psyche. All those years of absorbed emotions and unconscious manipulation have left residue. Jung compared it to a sponge that has absorbed toxic water for decades. For empaths, solitude is the clean water that allows contamination to release. During this phase, many empaths experience what Jung called the great exhaustion. They sleep more. They avoid stimulation. This is not depression. This is recovery. Jung emphasized that this withdrawal is not optional. You cannot learn to maintain boundaries while still embedded in systems that punish you for having them. The empath must extract themselves completely, spend time in what Jung called solitude and self-confrontation, and build their psychological structure in an environment free from constant invasion. Stage 3 is conscious return. After the empath has learned to distinguish their own psychological contents from absorbed material, after they have integrated their shadow capacity for coldness, after they have built strong internal containers, they can re-engage with the world. But they return completely changed. They are no longer the person everyone could dump on. They are selectively empathetic, strategically compassionate, consciously engaged. Jung called these individuals the integrated empaths. They possess extraordinary emotional intelligence, but deploy it with warrior precision. They can still read you completely, sense your wounds, perceive your unconscious motivations, but they are no longer obligated to heal you, forgive you, or tolerate your dysfunction. This creates what Jung called a reality distortion field for people who knew the empath before their transformation. The person who used to absorb everything now deflects everything. The person who always explained themselves now offers no explanations. The person who begged to be understood now does not care if you understand them or not. For manipulators, this is psychological death. They cannot guilt someone who no longer feels guilty. They cannot gaslight someone who trusts their own perceptions absolutely. They cannot manipulate someone who sees through every tactic before it is fully formed. Jung observed that integrated empaths often lose most of their pre-transformation relationships, not because the empath cuts people off, but because unconscious people cannot tolerate being around someone who reflects their shadow with such clarity. The empath's presence becomes a mirror, and most people will shatter the mirror rather than look at what it shows them. But Jung also documented something beautiful about this process. The integrated empath attracts completely different people, others who have done their own inner work, people capable of reciprocal empathy, individuals who view consciousness as something to develop rather than something to fear. Jung believed this was the empath's true purpose, not to heal everyone, but to find the few who are actually capable of mutual depth. The many who rejected you were never your people. They were obstacles you had to transcend to find your actual tribe. The climax of Jung's research came when he realized what the empath's transformation actually represented. This was not a personal healing journey. This was consciousness evolution happening in real time. Jung wrote that the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about change in society. Empaths who successfully integrate their shadow serve a collective function. They show other empaths that transformation is possible. They model boundaries for people who have never seen them. They prove that you can be sensitive without being a victim. Jung's patient from 1917 became one of his most successful case studies. After 3 years of individuation work, she had completely rebuilt her life. New career where her perceptive abilities were valued. Relationships with people who reciprocated her depth. Most importantly, she had stopped experiencing her sensitivity as a curse and started wielding it as a superpower. She told Jung in their final session that becoming avoidant was the best thing that ever happened to her. Not because she enjoyed being cold, but because learning to be cold taught her that she could survive without everyone's approval. That realization was freedom. Jung documented that she remained selectively avoidant for the rest of her life. Not with everyone, only with people who demonstrated they would exploit her empathy. She had developed what he called discernment, the ability to distinguish between people who deserved her gifts and people who would weaponize them. This is the integrated empath's superpower. They can feel everything and choose everything. They can be warm as summer with people who earn it, and cold as winter with people who do not. They can switch between these states consciously, strategically, without guilt. Jung believed this represented the future of human psychology. People who could access the full spectrum of human emotion without being controlled by any of it. Individuals who could be soft and hard, open and closed, vulnerable and armored, depending on what the situation required. But he also warned about the dangers of this transformation. The integrated empath walks a narrow path between two psychological disasters. On one side is regression into unconscious absorption. On the other side is inflation into permanent coldness. Some empaths overcorrect. They become so committed to never being hurt again that they close themselves off completely. They turn their necessary withdrawal into permanent isolation. They weaponize their perceptive abilities to punish rather than protect. Jung called this the hermit's trap, the belief that you have transcended the need for human connection when actually you have just been defeated by it. The truly integrated empath maintains the tension between opposites. They remain open to genuine connection while protected against exploitation. They stay sensitive to others' pain while bouncing back others' projections. They continue to care deeply while refusing to care about people who do not reciprocate. This is psychological mastery, and Jung believed it was the hardest thing a human being could achieve. Most people live in unconscious extremes, either completely open and constantly wounded, or completely closed and emotionally dead. The integrated empath learns to dance between these poles consciously. They can open when it serves them and close when it protects them. Jung's final insight about the empath's transformation was this: the avoidant phase is not a personality type, it is a developmental stage. You do not stay there forever. You pass through it on your way to something more complete. The empath, who has successfully integrated their shadow, does not avoid relationships. They avoid toxic relationships. They do not fear intimacy. They fear intimacy with people who have not done their inner work. They do not struggle with trust. They simply trust their own perceptions about who deserves trust. This looks like avoidance to people who are accustomed to empaths having no boundaries. But it is actually the opposite. It is conscious engagement. It is strategic intimacy. It is love with teeth. Jung spent decades studying empaths who broke. He documented the ones who stayed broken, trapped in unconscious absorption until it destroyed them. He celebrated the ones who transformed, who learned to integrate their shadow and become psychologically complete. His research proved that empaths are not destined for suffering. They are not required to absorb everyone's pain. They are not obligated to forgive people who keep hurting them. The empath's sensitivity is not a design flaw. It is an advanced feature of consciousness that most people never develop. But that feature requires conscious integration, or it becomes a weapon turned against its owner. When the empath finally becomes avoidant, they are not breaking down. They are breaking through years of conditioning that told them their boundaries were selfish, through family systems that punished them for having needs, through relationships that exploited their care and called it love. The avoidant phase is the chrysalis. What emerges is not a cold person. It is a complete person. Someone who can feel everything without being destroyed by feeling. Someone who can see everything without becoming bitter about seeing. Someone who can love deeply without losing themselves. You were not born to be everyone's emotional support system. You were born to master your own consciousness and model that mastery for others. Your transformation from unconscious empath to integrated warrior is not selfish. It is necessary. The world does not need more empaths who absorb everything. It needs empaths who have learned to integrate their shadow, establish boundaries, and direct their gifts toward people who reciprocate. Jung's most dangerous discovery was not that empaths can become avoidant. It was that empaths who become avoidant and do the integration work become the most psychologically powerful people in any room. They possess empathy's gifts without empathy's curses. They can read anyone but manipulate no one. They care deeply but strategically. If you recognize yourself in this transformation, you are not broken. You are becoming whole. The people who accuse you of being cold simply cannot understand that you have finally learned to preserve your warmth for those who deserve it. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.